Nathan stood at the edge of the grand ballroom in Washington, D.C., tugging at the cuff of his old gray suit and trying to slow his breathing as the chandeliers glowed like 1,000 small suns above polished marble floors, and waiters moved in smooth lines with silver trays and quiet shoes. It was his son's wedding day, the day he had imagined through long winters and long nights, the day that made every blister, every tired back, and every empty fridge feel like part of a path that finally made sense. Because he had raised Jason alone after Jason's mother left. And he had done it in this city of stone buildings and cold monuments by fixing what broke for other people. Pipes that burst at midnight, heaters that died in January, dishwashers that groaned and stopped, while he delivered groceries in the evenings to pay for school trips and shoes. And he never missed a parent-teacher meeting, even when he was covered in dust. So he told himself he belonged in this bright room, even if his jacket did not sit right on his shoulders, and even if his shoes pinched. He walked toward the family table as the string quartet slid from one soft song into another, and the photographer's flash popped near the dance floor, where Jason, tall and careful, posed with the bride and her family, and Nathan felt a quiet pride that sat warm in his chest like tea on a cold morning. But the pride drifted when he reached his seat and saw the little white card under a gold Father of the Groom line. Beneath those tidy printed words, someone had added a curl of glittering ink meant to look elegant. But it felt sharp, and it read, "Low-educated fake dad." And the letters were pretty on purpose, like poison poured into a crystal glass, so no one would notice until it burned. For a heartbeat, he thought it was a mistake, a prank, that would be corrected. But then he heard a quick, breathy snort from the bride's side, and he looked up and saw her father, a retired university dean with a stiff collar and a stiff smile. Turn his head and share a look with his wife, who covered her mouth with a napkin. And the two young cousins beside them leaned toward each other, eyes sliding to Nathan like he was a joke that had been told out loud, and one whispered, "He probably didn't even finish high school." And the other laughed the kind of laugh that tries to be small but wants to be seen. Nathan picked up the card, turned it face down, and placed it under his bread plate as if he could press the words flat, and he sat for a moment with his hands on his knees, feeling the heat rise along his neck and into his ears. And then the feeling shifted from heat to an old familiar weight that he knew from years of being told to use the service entrance, from years of being called buddy instead of sir, from years of knowing the difference between clean water and dirty water, even when other people did not care. And he decided he would not sit and be a prop in his own son's story if the price was to swallow that old weight again. He stood, meaning to step out quietly, meaning to call Jason later and say he had been tired, meaning to keep the night clean for the boy he had taught to hold a screwdriver straight, and to keep promises straight too. He took one slow step and then another, and the music kept playing, and the cake kept towering, and the laughter kept brushing against him like cold thread. And he kept his eyes on the exit so that he would not see the hurt he knew would be waiting in the corner of the room where the staff lined up to refill glasses. He almost reached the door when a hand closed around his wrist, gentle, firm, not a grab but a hold that said stay. And he turned and saw Jason. No smile now, just steady eyes that looked like the Potomac in late afternoon, smooth on top with a current running underneath. And Jason said, "Dad, let's go home," in a voice that did not shake. And Nathan tried to say, "Your wedding." But the words felt heavy in his mouth, and Jason was already shaking his head in that quiet way he had when he was little, and wanted to say the answer without making noise. The string quartet faltered because the DJ had turned down the volume by instinct when he felt the air change, and the room's hum shifted as faces turned. The bride stood near the cake, lips parted as if she had just remembered something important, and her father pushed his chair back an inch like he was preparing to argue in a meeting. And someone near the bar said, "What's happening?" And someone else whispered, "Is he leaving?" And the photographer lifted his camera but did not click because he suddenly did not know what story his lens would be telling if he did. Jason kept his hand on Nathan's wrist for one more heartbeat and then slid it down to hold his father's hand. the way a son holds a father's hand when he is 10 and crossing a busy street, except now he was a grown man in a fitted tuxedo, and he faced the room and said, calm and clear, "You all just made the biggest mistake of your lives. Not loud, not cruel, just clean, like a line drawn with a straight edge on paper that had been full of smudges. And for a second, no one moved because the sentence did not fit the party, and then a chair scraped, and a champagne flute rang against a plate, and a cousin laughed a nervous laugh that ended by itself. Nathan felt the first touch of cold air from the hallway on his cheek as they walked out, and he realized his shoulders had dropped because he was no longer trying to stand in two places at once. Proud father and punchline. He was just a father again, leaving with his son into a DC night that smelled like rain on stone. They crossed the lobby, where the florist's leftover stems lay in a bucket like small green wishes, and the valet looked up, surprised, and then looked down again because he knew how to read a room, and this hallway was a room with two people in it who did not need help. Outside, the evening traffic sang its city song of bus brakes and taxi horns, and the air carried a thin, damp edge, and Nathan's breath made a small cloud that disappeared and came back and disappeared again. And Jason stood still for a moment with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set, as if he were counting something only he could see. And Nathan wanted to tell him they could go back in, that they could sit on the edge of the celebration and let the night finish without them. But he also knew that some words could not be taken back, and some cards could not be turned over twice. And he felt, under the confusion of the moment, a strange, quiet shape forming. The shape of an answer to a question he had not known he was asking. The question of what a man should do when his name is written wrong, in front of the people who should help him keep it right. They walked to the curb where the hotel's awning ended and the honest sky began, and Jason unlocked the car with a soft chirp that sounded too cheerful for the moment. And Nathan got in and sat with his hands folded, and he watched through the windshield as a woman in a silver dress hurried to the revolving door and stopped, as if she had reached the glass and seen herself and did not like what she saw, and then she turned and vanished back into the light. And he wondered if she had been sent to call them back, and he wondered if the call would come later anyway. He did not know then what the next day would bring. But he felt the first small tremor of it, like the first tiny rattle of a pipe before the full rush of water. And he knew, without knowing why, that the line Jason had spoken was not just a sentence for a wedding night. It was the start of a set of steps, one after the other, simple and straight, that would lead back into a different room where other people would be the ones to read the card and feel heat on their necks. And that thought did not make him smile. But it did steady his hands as the car eased into the DC traffic and carried them home. The city slid by in wet reflections as Jason drove them away from the hotel, past the quiet monuments and the steady lights of Constitution Avenue. And Nathan sat very still in the passenger seat with his hands folded over the old calluses that never really faded, thinking only that he had wanted this night to be simple, and now it had a weight he could feel in his ribs. The wipers beat a slow rhythm, and they did not speak until Jason parked outside the brick apartment on H Street NE, where the stairs creaked and the hallway always smelled faintly of laundry soap and warm dust. The same place where spelling lists had been taped to the fridge and science fair posters had leaned against the wall, and only when the door clicked shut behind them did Jason turn and say, in a voice that was calm but tight, "I saw the card before you did." Nathan looked up, surprised and a little hurt, and then Jason took his phone from his pocket and tapped a video open with his thumb. The small screen glowed, showing the bride's father, Gregory Westbourne, laughing as he slid a gold pen to one cousin, the bride's mother covering a smile with a napkin, and Emily herself glancing over her shoulder, then nodding when someone whispered, "Write it pretty so he can't complain." And Nathan heard the worst line spoken like a joke in a quiet room. "My real father is the man I'm marrying." And he felt the words land like stones in deep water. Jason paused the video and set the phone on the table next to the old salt shaker with its crooked lid and said, "I needed to know if they would go that far, Dad. I wanted to be sure before I did anything." Nathan sank into the chair he had repaired twice with wood glue and clamps and asked, because he still did not understand, "Why didn't you stop them then?" Jason poured 2 glasses of tap water, slid one across, and answered, "Because I've been planning for months, and I needed proof. And because I knew if I spoke at the wedding, they would paint you as the problem again." He walked to the small cabinet where Nathan stored important papers and pulled out a slim gray folder he had hidden there the night before. He opened it and laid out clean documents with neat headings and black signatures. Charts that even a tired eye could follow, and he pointed with the edge of his hand like a man giving clear directions, not like a show. "You know their company," Jason said, "Westbourne Hospitality. They own those hotels with the big glass lobbies and the fussy brunches. For 2 years, they've been bleeding money in little leaks, bad contracts, old systems, too many fancy decisions, not enough solid work. Malik and I built a small security firm that fixed the kind of problems that sink hotels, the quiet IT holes, and the lazy maintenance plans that let power hiccup and credit card data drift. We sold the company last year. Clean deal. Not loud. And since then, I've been buying silent shares of Westbourne through partners who do not talk. I never signed the prenup they pushed at me. I never took their money. I kept taking the metro, kept my old jacket, kept living like I always did so nobody would see what I was doing." Nathan tried to match the boy he had helped learn fractions at this same table with the man who now spoke of filings and shares and control, and he felt something shift inside him, something like a door opening to a room he had not known was in the house. He lifted one page that showed percentages next to names and read the line that mattered. Cumulative ownership, 48%. And he looked up quickly. Jason nodded once. "At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," he said, "the last block settles. I hit 51. We notify their counsel at 9:05. At 9:15, we walk into their boardroom. I don't have to shout. The paper will do the talking." Nathan set the page down carefully, as if it might break, and his mind moved over the last 2 years and found small clues he had ignored. Jason working late with a quiet focus. Jason saying no to a new car, though he could have afforded one. Jason telling him gently that sometimes the fastest way to get respect was not to ask for it, but to build something that did not require permission. He remembered all those tiny moments, and they clicked together like fittings sealed with thread tape until the line was tight and clear. Jason's phone lit on the table and buzzed once, then twice, then 3 times in a row. The name Emily flashed and faded and flashed again, and Jason turned the phone face down and let the calls go, his jaw set but his voice still even as he said, "They're hearing whispers. Someone in their circle can count." The TV in the next apartment played a sports recap that rose and fell through the wall like a tide, and a siren wailed far off and faded, and Nathan took a long drink of water because his mouth had dried and said, "Son, you don't owe me anything for all those years. You don't have to fight like this for me." Jason sat across from him, elbows off the table the way Nathan had taught him, and shook his head. "I'm not doing it to pay you back," he said, and he looked straight at Nathan so there was no room for misunderstanding. "I'm doing it because of you. What you taught me. Keep your word. Fix the leak you can't see yet. Don't talk big. Do the work. They tried to step on that, and I won't let them." He pushed a single index card across the table where Nathan's old grocery lists used to live. The card had a simple heading printed in black. Carter Fund, Blue Collar Scholars, and under it, a few lines in Jason's small block letters. Tuition grants for trade schools, apprenticeship partnerships with hotel engineering teams, basic IT security training for maintenance staff, selection priority, families with demonstrated need. And Nathan stared at it until the letters blurred and said very quietly, "This looks right." Jason checked the clock on the stove, an old digital display that drifted 5 minutes fast, and said, "We'll leave at 8:40. We'll walk in with clean copies and say what needs to be said. I want you beside me, Dad. Not behind me. Beside me." Nathan nodded because words felt big in his throat, and he stood and went to the small coat rack by the door and ran a palm over his old jacket as if smoothing it could smooth the day ahead. He thought of the way the bride's cousins had leaned together to whisper and the way the gold ink had curled on the card, and he felt a new kind of steadiness spread from his chest to his shoulders. Not rage, not pride, but a firm balance like a ladder set true on level ground. Jason's phone buzzed again, and then stopped. And he picked it up, glanced at the screen without opening anything, and said, almost to himself, "Missing calls don't change the truth." And he slid the phone into a drawer and closed it with a soft, final sound. He set out 2 clean shirts for the morning, placed the documents back in the folder, and checked a small list he had written in the corner of a page. 9 filing, 9:05 council notice, 9:15 boardroom, 9:40 security brief, 10 staff memo. And next to the staff memo, he had written 3 words, each on its own line: respect, clarity, dignity. Nathan watched his son move with that quiet purpose and thought of the night years ago when a pipe had burst in a neighbor's ceiling and they had gone together at midnight with a bucket and a wrench, and how Jason had held the flashlight steady without being asked, and how together they had turned off the main and saved the apartment from ruin. Tomorrow felt like that same work, but in a grander building, with more people below who would be grateful if the water stopped pouring through their ceiling. He put a pot of water on the stove for tea, the same brand he always bought no matter the week, and Jason smiled, small and real, and said, "Sleep a little, Dad? I'll do one more pass on the numbers." And Nathan nodded and went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the soft sounds of paper and keyboard and the city breathing through the window. And he did not know exactly how the morning would look, but he knew the line they would walk would be straight. And in that knowing, he finally felt the sour heat from the ballroom wash out of him like old water running clear. Morning came to Washington, D.C., gray and thin, and Nathan woke before his alarm, the habit of a lifetime tugging him to his feet while the street outside still yawned into light. And he moved through the small apartment with quiet hands, setting water to boil, laying 2 plates on the table, smoothing a wrinkle from his jacket sleeve the way he used to smooth a wrinkle from Jason's school shirt. When Jason stepped out of his room already in the navy suit that made him look older and sharper, he carried the same gray folder and a new stillness in his shoulders, the kind a man wears when the answer has already been chosen. And they ate in a hush that was not fear but focus, eggs and toast disappearing while the kettle hissed like a soft warning. And then the work began in exact steps. No rush, no show. Jason opened his laptop, checked the wire confirmation from the brokerage, the way a plumber checks a joint for a hidden leak, eyes steady, fingers patient. Then cross-checked the names on a short list of silent sellers who had waited for just the right morning to press send. And Nathan watched the lines turn from pending to complete, as if watching valves twist from closed to open, one after another, until the whole line ran clear. At 8:47, Jason called their attorney, a woman with a voice that carried neat edges, and he said, "Counsel, please confirm receipt." And she said, "Received and recorded." And then he sent the notice letters to Westbourne's counsel and corporate secretary with a subject line that would travel through the building like a sudden gust. Majority ownership confirmation, effective 09 EST. And when he hit send, he did not lean back or smile. He simply placed the laptop in his bag with the folder on top and slid in the pen Nathan had given him years ago, a cheap black roller that wrote clean when the nib was warm. The phone on the counter started to buzz then. Slow at first, an unknown number that turned into a pattern. Nathan could read like water hammer in a pipe, the rhythm of panic. Unknown, Emily, unknown, Emily's mother, stacking against the lock screen until Jason pressed the side button and darkened the noise. And he looked at Nathan and said, not as a boast, but as a measure, "We stay quiet until we're in the room." And Nathan nodded because he understood that holding your tongue can be a kind of wrench too, the kind that turns without slipping. They left at 8:35, coats buttoned, papers in order, and stepped into a morning that smelled of wet concrete and hot bus brakes, passing the corner where Nathan once taught Jason to ride a bicycle in a small circle so he would learn balance before speed. And at Union Station, they cut across the plaza as a train horn blew a long note that made the pigeons lift and settle again, and every step felt like a simple job done right. Unlock, inspect, test, close. In the metro, they stood shoulder to shoulder near the door, and Nathan looked at their reflection in the dark window, an old man with careful eyes and a younger man with a straight mouth, and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel the night before. Not pride exactly, but agreement, like the city itself was nodding at them in the glass. They came up near Judiciary Square and walked toward the glass wedge of Westbourne's headquarters, its lobby all stone and echo and the low hum of power. And at 8:53, Jason checked his watch, then the screen, then the folder again, and Nathan saw a small sealed envelope tucked behind the documents. No label, only Jason's neat initials across the flap. And he almost asked but did not, because he knew that sometimes you do not tug at a knot before it is time. At 8:58, Jason's phone chimed with a final email. Transfer executed. Position 51.2 cent. And he showed it to Nathan without words. And Nathan placed his hand once on Jason's shoulder, the way he did when Jason was 7 and about to step onto a stage for a school assembly. A brief wait that said, "I am here." Then he let go. The guard at the desk glanced up when they entered, then down at his screen, then up again, his eyes catching on the names in the visitor log that had just been typed from upstairs. And the elevator doors slid open with a soft sigh, like a breath someone had been holding too long. And they rose through floors of carpet and glass and low conversation until the bell rang and the doors opened to the 24th floor, where the boardroom sat like a ship's bridge above the city. They stepped out, and the receptionist stood halfway from her chair, as if unsure whether to smile or run a message. And Jason said politely, "We're expected." And his tone left no room for the usual questions. And Nathan felt the temperature of the hallway in a way only a man who has spent his life in buildings can feel it. Cool air pushing gently from a vent that someone finally remembered to balance. The whir of a return hidden behind louvered wood. The faintest metallic scent that meant fresh elevator brakes. And all of it told him the building was ready for something the people were not. At 9, Jason stopped at a small side table and signed the hard copy acknowledgement his attorney had couriered, the ink drying in a thin line that caught the light. And in that simple act, Nathan saw an entire map of cause and effect. A boy holding a flashlight for his father in a dark hallway. A teenager fixing a neighbor's Wi-Fi for $20 to cover a field trip. A young man reading the fine print on a lease so his father would not get caught by a trap clause. And now a grown man pressing a pen to paper that would turn a family's mocking into a lesson they could not grade away. The phone vibrated in Jason's pocket. At the same moment, a muted chime inside the boardroom announced an incoming call on the conference line. And Nathan felt the old edge of mystery rise. Not the scary kind, but the kind that comes before a truth shows itself. The sense that behind one more door, someone would say a sentence that would change how the rest of the day moved. And Jason looked at him and nodded once toward the frosted glass, and together they walked forward. Two shadows crossing into a bright room where chairs scraped and a window threw a cold square of morning across polished wood. And Nathan thought, as his feet crossed the threshold, that the line they had kept straight from the moment they left the ballroom was about to meet the crooked lines drawn by people who thought gold ink could decide a man's worth. And he felt ready, in the simple way a man feels ready when he has the right tool in his hand and a leak in front of him that must be stopped today. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. The boardroom looked like a museum of important decisions. Long polished table, tall windows facing a gray Washington sky, a sideboard with untouched coffee in silver urns. And as Nathan and Jason stepped in at exactly 9:15, the small sounds told the truth before any person did. Chairs scraped an inch, papers shuffled in short, nervous bursts. Someone's pen clicked twice and then stilled, and the conference phone glowed with a missed call that no one wanted to answer. Gregory Westbourne sat at the head with his shoulders stiff and his jaw set like a man who had grown used to being the final word in any room. And beside him, Emily's mother folded and unfolded a linen handkerchief as if neat corners could keep the day smooth. And two cousins tried to look bored but could not keep their eyes from darting toward Nathan, who took a chair near the wall and set his hands on his knees, calm, steady, present. Jason did not rush. He placed the gray folder on the table, opened it to the first tab, and slid copies to the company secretary and the outside counsel who had come in early and now sat with her glasses low, scanning lines with a deliberate pace. He spoke in a steady voice that carried to the corners of the room without effort. "Effective 9 o'clock this morning," he said, "I hold 51.2% of Westbourne Hospitality Group through aggregated purchases duly filed and recorded. Here are the transfer confirmations, custodial statements, beneficial ownership disclosures, and the acknowledgement from your registered agent." He did not look at Gregory first. He looked at the board, men and women who had likely built parts of this company with decent intentions, and met each gaze for a breath before moving on. "I did not come to burn down what good people raised," he added. "I came to fix what careless choices let leak." The counsel cleared her throat softly, flipped a page, and said, "These appear valid. I'd like 5 minutes to confirm with our internal records." Gregory slapped a palm on the table, not loud enough to be dramatic, just enough to shake a water glass. "This is some trick," he said, color rising in his face. "No one buys a majority in silence." Jason kept his hands flat. "People sell in silence when they're tired of not being heard," he answered. "Vendors, former partners, funds you courted when the numbers were prettier. They were ready when I offered fair price and no speeches." He turned a page to a short agenda with 3 items printed in simple type. 1. Acknowledgement of majority ownership. 2. Immediate governance changes. 3. Operational stabilization plan. "We will proceed in that order." The secretary's phone buzzed, and she peered down, eyes widening, then nodding to counsel, who nodded back, the small choreography of confirmation. "We have verification," counsel said. "The filings are complete. The percentages align." For a thin instant, the room made a new sound, silence with weight. Then the cousins began to talk over each other until Gregory raised a hand. "You won't last," he said. "Running hotels is not an app." Jason almost smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "I agree," he said. "It's not an app. It's hot water at 6 in the morning. It's payroll on Fridays. It's locks that work, elevators that don't trap guests, and systems that do not leak numbers into the dark. I started in systems because your properties kept failing in ways that hurt the guests and the staff first and the shareholders last." He slid a second document forward, this one only 2 pages. "Effective immediately, members of the Westbourne family are relieved of all roles, board seats, advisory positions, ceremonial titles, consulting arrangements. Severance will follow the same schedule you wrote for departing executives 3 years ago." Emily's mother drew in a breath like a small gasp and whispered, "You can't speak to us like this." But Jason did not raise his voice. "I'm speaking to the board," he said, and then, after a beat, "and to the room." He turned his head so everyone could see Nathan seated by the wall, and his tone changed. Not softer, not harder, just clearer. "Yesterday," he said, "someone here wrote, 'low-educated fake dad' beneath my father's name at my wedding. I kept the card." He reached into the folder and placed a small evidence sleeve on the table without drama. "You wanted a story where status counts more than respect. That story ends today. This company will not run on that story anymore." A manager at the far end, mid-50s, hotel lifer by the look of his careful tie and his thick binder, shifted forward as if a knot in his back had loosened. "What about staff?" he asked, the first voice in the room that sounded like work. Jason nodded as if grateful for the question. "Operational stabilization plan," he said, tapping item 3. "We will audit every property within 60 days. We will prioritize maintenance and safety systems over cosmetic spend. We will pay overdue vendor balances and renegotiate any sweetheart deals that cost this company dollars to buy a cousin's approval. We will launch apprenticeships with DC trade schools for engineering and IT. And we will send a memo in plain language to every housekeeper, dishwasher, bellman, and night auditor by end of day. You are seen. Your work matters. Your job is safe if you do it with care." Nathan watched faces change by inches. The tightness around a mouth easing, the lift of an eyebrow. That means someone has just decided to stay late for the right reason. And he realized this was the unbelievable thing that would be written about later. Not the numbers, not the signatures, but the way a room built on fear could tilt toward respect in under an hour when someone simply called the leak by its name and then reached for the wrench. Gregory stood then, slow, as if his body had to argue with gravity. "Security will remove you," he said. But even as he said it, the door opened behind Nathan, and two building security officers stepped in at a respectful distance, hands visible, faces neutral. Jason inclined his head to them. "Good morning," he said. "You're here to assist departing directors in collecting personal items and to ensure all staff are treated with respect." One officer glanced to the secretary, who nodded, and the officer's shoulders settled into the professional calm of a job understood. Emily's mother started to speak again, but her voice frayed at the edges, and she stared instead at the gleam of the table, as if it might show her another version of the morning that could be stepped into if she looked hard enough. Jason signed 3 places on the governance form, initialed the margins, and passed the pen to counsel, who countersigned with the precision of someone who knows where every comma goes. The meeting moved in clean lines after that. Motions made and recorded, directors' names struck and replaced with independents selected from a list Jason had prepared. People with dull resumes in the best way. Operations, compliance, risk, hospitality engineering. "We'll need your institutional history," Jason told 2 non-family directors who had kept their notes close and their eyes down. "If you want to help fix what's broken, stay. If you want to fight for what failed us, step aside, and I'll thank you for your time." The older of the 2 looked at Nathan and then back at Jason. "I'll stay," she said. "If the first memo goes to housekeepers, it's overdue." Outside, a siren wailed and thinned, the city doing its own job. Inside, the conference phone lit again with an incoming call labeled private, and no one reached for it. Jason closed the folder, slid the small sealed envelope from behind the documents, and without opening it, placed it in his inner pocket like a promise to a later hour. He turned to Nathan, not as a flourish, but as a completion. "We're done here," he said quietly. "Let's go talk to the people who make beds and fix boilers." Nathan stood, feeling the odd lightness that comes when a heavy load is finally set down right. He took one last look at the room, the silver urns, the careful view, the faces blinking as if they had walked from bright sun into honest shade, and he followed his son out, the elevator doors closing, with a soft seal that reminded him of a quiet, perfect joint. No drip, no hiss, only the sound a building makes when water is finally running where it should. They stepped out of the glass tower into a noon that felt cleaner than the morning, and Nathan noticed it first in the way his shoulders loosened, as if the sky above Judiciary Square had been holding its breath and finally let it out. Jason did not celebrate, did not throw his hands up or call anyone. He simply walked with his father to a small coffee shop around the corner, where the counters were nicked from years of cups, and the chalkboard menu leaned a little to one side, and he ordered 2 black coffees and a simple sandwich. They could split, because food steadies a hand after hard work. And they took a table by the window where Nathan could watch the street and the door together, the way a man who has worked in other people's spaces always does, careful without looking nervous. Jason opened his laptop and began to type the first of the day's messages. Not grand statements, but short, clear sentences sent to people whose names came from a list he had made long before this morning. Regional managers, property engineers, night auditors, vendor leads. And each note had the same shape: respect in the greeting, a plain statement of the change, a promise not to cut corners where it hurts, and 3 steps for the week ahead. As he typed, his phone buzzed where it faced down on the table, and the vibrations formed a small drum under the wood, each one a missed attempt to pull the day backward. And Nathan watched the counter on the screen when Jason finally flipped it over to check the time. 7 missed calls, then 9, then 12, most from Emily, some from unknown, one from Gregory's assistant. And the number kept climbing like a slow elevator that would not stop at any floor they were willing to visit. A young man in a line cook's jacket came in, recognized Jason from trade news that was already moving faster than anyone expected, and hesitated near the sugar station like someone who wanted to speak but did not want to be heard by the wrong ears. And Jason nodded him over and said, "What's your name?" And the young man said, "Luis, sir." And Jason said, "Jason is fine." And Luis leaned in and whispered that his mother cleaned rooms at the West End property and had been afraid all month because hours were cut whenever a cousin wanted a new lobby vase. Jason took down her name and schedule in a small notebook, the way a careful technician writes the location of a hidden shutoff. And he said, "Tell her the cuts stop now unless the property is empty. And even then, we rotate fairly." And he slid his card across the table with a private number written on it, not the one that was buzzing itself across the tabletop. And Luis put the card in his pocket like something you do not want to risk losing in a wash. By 1 o'clock, the counter on Jason's screen read 19 missed calls. By 1:30, it read 23. And the voicemails stacked in a list that looked like a long hallway of closed doors, and each new call was a soft mechanical sound that made the barista glance over, then look away. Because everyone in the city knows when a story is happening 2 feet from the tip jar, and also knows when to let it happen without commentary. Jason drafted the staff memo next, and Nathan felt a small, quiet awe as he watched the words appear. To every housekeeper, dishwasher, night auditor, bell captain, engineer, and front desk clerk. Because he could hear the cadence of promise, without the sugar of flattery. Just the weight of someone finally saying out loud that the work that keeps guests safe and comfortable is the work that gets honored first. Jason added a paragraph about vendor arrears, that payments would be brought current in stages with transparency, and that any vendor relationship based on family ties without value would be reopened and rebid. And Nathan thought of all the times he had fixed leaks caused by parts chosen for show instead of strength, and felt the rightness run through him, like warm water through a newly bled line. At 2 o'clock, 2 property managers appeared in the doorway, coats still on, rain speckling their sleeves. The guarded look of people who had prepared for a fight but hoped for a handshake. They stood a respectful distance from the table until Jason waved them over, introduced Nathan as his father without adding any ornament, and listened as they spoke not about gala budgets or influencer packages, but about boilers that limped through winter and elevators that groaned after 11 at night when no executive ever rode them. And Jason asked questions that went to the center of things. How many callouts on the overnight? How old are the motor controllers? What's the backlog on keycard encoders? And the managers realized he spoke their language and not the empty one, and their shoulders shifted down an inch all at once. While they talked, the phone's counter reached 27, then 29. When it hit 30, an unknown number left a voice message that made the phone buzz longer than usual, and Jason angled the screen so Nathan could see but did not play the recording. He simply tapped save and wrote a note in the margin of his pad. 3:02 p.m. Unknown, likely counsel, and set the phone aside again because urgency is not always importance. He sent the memo at 2:20 p.m., blind copied to property leaders who would post it in break rooms and read it aloud at daily stand-ups. And then he wrote to the engineering chiefs with a separate note about apprenticeship slots, partnering with DC trade schools, paid study hours, and a path from porter to engineer that did not require a cousin with a key. And Nathan remembered the broken night years ago when they had fixed a neighbor's burst pipe by turning off the main at the curb, and how, afterward, Jason had said, "People sleep because you know where the valve is." And he thought, now the city's hotel workers might sleep easier for the same reason. At 2:32, the counter rolled to 32 missed calls. Emily, filling 8 of the last 10 entries, and Jason stared at the number for a full breath. Not in triumph, but in recognition that this was a door closing itself. And he let it close. He opened one voicemail, the first she had left that morning. Listened to 5 seconds, a rush of breath, and the start of "Jason, please." And he pressed stop and deleted it without anger. And Nathan saw in his son's face not cruelty, but a choice kept clean. There would be no conversation that turned the day into a negotiation over dignity. A quiet bell over the door chimed again, and an older man in a maintenance uniform came in. A patch over his pocket said R. McCall, and he nodded at Nathan with the subtle respect workers give each other when they recognize a lifetime in the set of a person's shoulders. And he said to Jason, "The rumor says you're paying vendors up to current if the work's real." And Jason said, "The rumor is right." And Mr. McCall said, "Then I'll unblock the number I've been ignoring." And they both almost smiled. Somewhere far off, a siren rose and thinned to a thread. Jason packed the laptop at last, stacked the empty cups, wiped the crumbs from the table with a napkin out of habit, and stood so that the chair made only the smallest sound on the tiled floor. "We'll stop by 2 properties before we go home," he said. "I want to see the basements before the lobbies." And Nathan nodded, because that is how you learn what a building is telling you. And as they reached the door, the phone buzzed once more, a long, low vibration that signaled a text instead of a call, and Jason glanced down at a new message from an unknown number that read, "We need to talk about the Georgetown incident. Urgent." And he tucked the phone away without answering. But Nathan felt a small thread of mystery tighten in the room, the kind that means another leak has been waiting behind a wall. And he thought, good, better to find every leak now while the water is still only a stain and not a flood. Outside, the afternoon had cleared into a pale, honest light, and father and son stepped into it, moving in a straight line that made sense, with 32 missed calls behind them, and a city of rooms ahead that needed warm air at 6, quiet elevators at midnight, and a new story posted in the break room that said in plain words what mattered. Every person's work has dignity. Tay! And respect is not a perk, it is a practice. Evening settled over Washington, D.C., with a thin rain that turned streetlights into soft halos, and Nathan moved around the small kitchen like he always did after a long day, rinsing rice in a metal bowl until the water ran clear, laying chicken in a pan with salt and pepper and a little oil, and setting collard greens to simmer while the apartment filled with the kind of warmth that tells a tired man he is home. Jason came in from the bedroom without his jacket, sleeves rolled, tie in his pocket, and he set the gray folder on the counter and checked the stove clock as if dinner were another item on a list done right, and they ate at the old table without much talk, the kind of quiet that does not press, only rests. And when the knock came, it was soft at first, then again with a quick rhythm that had worry inside it. And Jason stood. Nathan set down his fork, and the third knock came just as the chain slid. And Emily stood in the hallway with the rain in her hair and a half-wet designer coat that did not fit the narrow line of the building, her hands clutching a bag to her chest like a shield. For a second, no one spoke, and then she said Jason's name once, her voice thin, then louder, as if she were practicing a tone that might make time run backward. And Jason stepped aside enough that she could see Nathan at the table and the plate he had set for leftovers. And the sight seemed to take some air out of her shoulders because she lowered the bag and said, "Mr. Carter, I am sorry," the words flat like a memorized sentence. And Nathan nodded once, not cold, but not inviting. And he said, "Please come in out of the rain," which was the same thing he would have said to any person left standing on a wet landing. She entered and stood on the mat, dripping carefully like someone who had never had to think about other people's floors. And Jason handed her a small towel from the hook by the door and waited while she dabbed at the water that had run to her jawline. And then he asked, "Why are you here?" in a voice that was quiet and even, the voice he used when he wanted a clean answer. Emily looked smaller without the ballroom or the bright family, and she started to speak about pressure and expectations and a father who believed that degrees were the only real proof. And then her voice broke, and she said they had wanted him to sign the prenup, and that the gold pen was a joke that went too far. And she started to say that she had texted and called because she wanted to fix it before the news finished its lap around the industry. And Jason lifted a hand and said, "I have 32 missed calls. I understand you reached out." And he walked to the counter and pulled from the gray folder a small envelope he had placed there that morning and slid it across the table toward her, the flap already cut, the single page inside ready. She looked down and did not touch it. And Nathan could see from where he sat the 2 simple paragraphs written in clear wording, the clause that said no member of the Westbourne family could serve, consult, or hold shares in Westbourne or its affiliates now or later, and that any attempt to do so would trigger penalties already set aside and signed by her parents when they sold their last block to the silent partners Jason had gathered. Jason said, "This is not to punish you. It is to protect the staff and the work." And Emily finally picked up the paper, read, swallowed, and then said she had been told by her father that business was hard, and sometimes hard meant stepping on pride. And Nathan said, "Sometimes people use the word hard to hide the word wrong," and his voice had no anger in it, only the weight of an old truth. Emily's eyes filled, and she asked if there was a way to start again from before the card, before the whispers, before the laugh that had run through the ballroom like a wire. And Jason shook his head once and said, "We could have started again yesterday with 3 words. That's not funny. You had that power and chose not to use it, and he did not say it to wound. He said it to mark a line." The building was quiet around them, the sound of a TV somewhere low, and the drip of rain from the fire escape. And Nathan could feel a different thread running under the visit, a small tension that came from the text Jason had received earlier about the Georgetown incident. And he waited to see if Emily would bring it up as another lever to pull. But she did not. She kept her eyes on Jason and asked if they could talk somewhere without Mr. Carter, not out of disrespect but out of habit, taught by a family that always wanted a closed door. And Jason said, "No closed doors, not anymore." And he motioned to the chair across from Nathan and said, "Sit, if you want to sit, or speak from where you are." And Emily chose to sit and placed her bag on her lap and said that she had believed Jason needed her family's network to grow, and that she had believed Nathan was a good man, but not the kind of father a man like Jason showed at a table like the one they had set. And she said the last part in a voice that seemed to get smaller with each word until it nearly disappeared. And Nathan said, He never needed my name to be fancy to walk through a door. He needed my name to be clean when he went to sleep." And he let the sentence rest in the room until the rain softened. Jason picked up the envelope again, slipped the paper back inside, and placed it on the table between them like a finish line you cannot move. And he said, "You are barred from the company by a document your parents signed because they knew this day might come. I will not rescind it. I will not bend it, and I will not let you in by a side door that says 1 time only on it." And Emily nodded slowly, as if her neck had to remember how to move under the weight of a new rule. And then she said she had heard a rumor about an old problem at the Georgetown property, and that she could help smooth it because she knew the people involved. And Jason did not look surprised. He only said, "The message reached me, and we will handle it the right way, by the book, not by a favor that creates another leak." And he added, "If you know anything that prevents harm, send it through counsel in writing." And he stood, which in a small room is as clear as a bell, the signal that a talk is done. Emily rose too and hesitated like there was one more sentence in her throat that wanted to be a bridge and not a rope. And she looked to Nathan as if he might reach across and rewrite the moment with a touch. And Nathan met her eyes, gentle but steady, and said, "Respect equals love. If you start there next time, you will not end up at a stranger's door asking for something that was never yours to take." And she held his gaze for the first honest beat of the night, then looked at Jason and said, "I am sorry." And this time it sounded less like a script and more like a person hearing herself. And Jason nodded once without saying the words people use when they want to ease pain they should not ease. And he opened the door, and she stepped into the hall, and he closed it softly so the door did not rattle the frame. The apartment was quiet again, except for the hiss of the burner under the pot where greens still steamed, and Jason went to the sink and washed 3 plates, though they had used only 2, because the small order of rinsing and stacking helped his hands settle. And Nathan dried and put them away, the movement easy from years. And then they sat back down because the day was not finished. Not really. The phone on the counter buzzed once with a new text. The same unknown number repeating the word urgent about Georgetown. And Jason wrote back a single line, "Meeting 9 a.m., bring documents," and turned the phone face down. And Nathan asked what he thought the incident might be. And Jason said he had a guess. Kickbacks tied to a renovation that never finished, possibly a safety lapse buried in emails, and that they would open every wall tomorrow if they had to. And Nathan smiled a small, tired smile and said, "Water tells the truth, son." And Jason nodded because he knew that already, but it was good to hear it spoken out loud. They finished the last of the chicken. let the rain work itself out, and the hallway light clicked off on its timer, and a dog barked once far away. And in the simple hush that followed, Nathan felt the day's line hold firm from the moment in the ballroom to the soft close of the door. And the mystery that remained did not bend that line. It only pointed toward the morning, and a basement and a set of records that would either be clean or not, and either way would be met in the same straight way, with light, with paper, with work. Morning came again with a thin brightness over DC. And at 8:55, Jason and Nathan were already in a small conference room at Westbourne headquarters with their counsel and the man behind the urgent text, an assistant night manager from the Georgetown property named Derek, mid-30s. Tired eyes, a careful way of speaking like someone who had been ignored before. He set a cheap thumb drive on the table and said he did not want money. He only wanted the hotel to be safe and honest because his mother worked housekeeping on the day shift, and he did not sleep well knowing what he knew. And then he opened a folder of printed emails and invoices that told a simple story in plain lines. A cousin-owned contractor called Potomac Renovations LLC, billing for emergency electrical and pump upgrades that were never done. Change orders signed by a former regional who now had a job title at a consultancy. With no office, inspection tags photographed and pasted into reports without dates, a fire pump monthly test passed on paper while the pump itself sat cold, an elevator controller marked pending replacement for 8 months, though the invoice showed it complete. Jason did not interrupt. He let Derek speak until the words ran out, then asked 3 short questions. Who signed this? Where is the pump room key? When did you first report it? And after each answer, he wrote the name or time in block letters on his pad. Counsel looked through the emails, the kind of steady look that measures both law and harm, and said, "We need to self-report to the city and the fire marshal before noon." And Jason nodded at once, no hesitation, because that was how the news story would be told. Not with cover, with light. By 9:20, they were in a car heading to the Georgetown Hotel, crossing near Key Bridge while the Potomac ran flat and gray. Derek sat in back, silent, and Nathan watched the side streets slide past, the small shops opening, the delivery trucks easing into alleys, the city doing its work one door at a time. The Georgetown property looked handsome outside. Brick, flags, nice awning, like a painted wall that hides a wet stain. Inside, the lobby was calm, a bellman who knew how to stand straight, a clerk whose smile had practice, and Jason did not stop to greet guests because the first duty was below. They took the service elevator down, the kind guests never see, and stepped into a corridor with low ceilings, pale paint, and a smell Nathan knew too well. Warm dust, old water, and a thin electric tang that means something is thinking about burning. The mechanical room door was locked. Derek handed over the key, and the heat rolled out as if the room breathed wrong. Nathan moved first because the room spoke his language, pumps and pipes and panels, and he followed the sounds with his ear, not his eyes. A chatter in a relay that should be quiet, a small hammer in a line that should be smooth, the soft, irregular whine that means a bearing will fail soon. Lights, he said, and someone found the switch. There it was, proof in red and rust. The fire pump status light dark, the test switch zip-tied into pass, a tag hung on a string that had been stamped last year and never changed, and a loop of pipe with paint brushed over a line of corrosion so neat it looked like a school project. Jason took photos of everything, not dramatic, just clear frames that would become part of a clean record, while counsel called the city fire marshal and said the sentence most companies avoid, "We need you on site. We believe our documentation was false." And then called the insurer to declare a potential loss exposure because that is what grown leadership does when truth leaks out of a wall. Derek led him to the elevator room. Nathan stopped in the doorway because he could hear the controller box humming with a pitch he did not like, a strained note, and he laid the back of his hand near the panel, not on it, and felt heat that had no business being there. "Kill power to car 2, he said. And the engineer on duty, a woman in her 40s with a name patch that read S. Alvarez, did not ask why. She moved, because she too knew the difference between maybe and must. She threw the breaker with a practiced hand, and the hum died in a way that said they had taken the building 1 inch back from a bad day, and Nathan breathed out. Jason spoke with Alvarez 5 quiet minutes and learned the rest. Work orders closed upstairs without parts ever arriving, requests for overtime denied on nights when 2 emergencies came at once, and a bonus last winter for a manager who had kept repair spend under budget, which meant he had put off fixes until spring. Jason said, "No more of that," and wrote it down. Then he asked what parts she needed to make the room safe this week, and she named them like a grocery list, and he told her to order today from the good vendor, not the cousin vendor. Charge it to stabilization. And her face changed by a small degree that means a person underweight has been allowed to stand upright again. At 10:05, the fire marshal arrived with 2 inspectors. They expected a fight, but Jason met them at the service lift with a notebook and open hands, led them straight to the pump room, and said, "We're here to fix and to cooperate." And Nathan stood to the side, watching an old, important dance be done right for once. The inspectors took their own photos, lifted their own tags, and when they saw the zip tie on the test switch, one of them swore softly, not at the new team, but at the idea of a lie that could have cost lives. Citations were prepared on clipboards, paper, thick lines, boxes checked, and Jason signed for receipt. No lawyer tricks, and then asked for guidance on temporary measures and timelines to clear. They gave it, and counsel wrote each step in a neat hand, and Nathan asked 2 questions about water pressure and city supply. That made the younger inspector glance up with respect, because he realized the gray-haired man by the wall was not a mascot. He was someone who could tell if a pump was lying by the sound alone. By 11:30, Jason had canceled 5 high-gloss lobby projects and moved that money into emergency systems, set a daily check at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m., with log entries that required a photo and a signature, and directed HR to make sure any staff who had raised these alarms earlier had protection from retaliation. He also told Alvarez to post the fire marshal's temporary orders in the break room so every worker knew the truth and the plan. Texts kept coming in, a few from numbers he recognized as damage control types. But the screen stayed dark on the table of the security office where he had left it face down, and Nathan thought again how quiet can be a tool. At noon, they gathered the housekeeping leads, bell staff, and engineering crew in a plain back hallway because the lobby was for show, and this talk was for work. And Jason introduced himself in one sentence, introduced Nathan in one sentence, and then said, "Here's what we found, and here's what we're doing. If you see something that looks wrong, tell Alvarez or tell me. If someone tells you not to write it down, write it twice." And then he did the thing that changed the air. He apologized, not for himself alone, but for a company that had looked away, and he promised it would not look away again. He did not ask them to believe him. He told them they would see it, and they could judge with their own eyes. Nathan added one short line at the end, because the moment wanted one. "Fix the leak before you paint," he said, and a laugh ran soft and real along the wall, because the workers knew the truth of it. And Alvarez smiled, the kind of smile that shows teeth and relief at the same time. On the way out, a reporter tried to catch Jason by the curb with a microphone about the unbelievable takeover and rumors of safety failures. Jason said, "We're doing the right thing by the book," then walked on, because the book was more important than the camera. They ate late sandwiches in the car and headed to the next site with the same plan, basements before lobbies. And all afternoon the line held, look, listen, log, fix. As dusk came, counsel texted that the insurer had responded favorably because of the self-report and the immediate steps, and the fire marshal sent a note that inspections would continue next week with priority scheduling based on the new owner's cooperation, which was not praise, but it was respect, and respect was the currency Nathan valued. He sat back, tired in a clean way, and watched his son take one more call, this time from a manager at a property in Noma who said he had 2 trainees ready for the apprenticeship program if the company truly meant it. And Jason said, "We mean it. Send their names." And Nathan felt something settle inside him like a joint turned tight. The sense that tomorrow would be heavy but honest, and that the mystery left in the story was not if they would be caught, but how fast they could set things right. Spring slid into summer, and then into fall, and the work moved forward one steady day at a time, so that by the time leaves turned along Massachusetts Avenue, Westbourne's basements sounded different. No angry hums, no rattles that meant later when now was the truth. Because Jason and the teams had raised weak systems and closed old leaks, and the fire marshal's follow-up notes shifted from red tags to clean check marks. And Nathan watched the change the way a man watches water clear in a pipe after the air is bled. First a cough, then a cloud, then a smooth run. Hotel by hotel, the pattern repeated. Safety first, pay vendors in order, audit contracts, train people who wanted to learn. And in simple ways, the city began to respond, not with headlines every day, but with small signs like a housekeeper telling a friend that her hours were steady again, or a bell captain saying, the new overnight elevator, checks meant no one got stuck at 2 a.m. Or an engineer laughing in a break room because a spare part actually arrived when the work order said it would. Jason kept his promises in short memos and long walks, showing up at dawn to read the logs, showing up at night to listen to staff who never saw executives at their posts. And Nathan often walked with him, a quiet presence in a plain jacket, leaning near panels to listen for trouble before a gauge showed it, speaking to workers in the steady language of tools and time. And while a few reporters still tried to spin a different story, shock takeover, revenge son, the day-to-day story kept winning because guests slept without alarms and teams left shifts with less worry in their shoulders. In November, Council sent word that the insurer had given premium credit for the self-report, and HR showed numbers that were not flashy but were honest. Lower turnover, fewer double shifts, more internal promotions to engineer from porter. And Jason posted those numbers on staff bulletin boards without spin so everyone could see where they stood. In December, a lawyer for the old family delivered a short letter to council that said a civil dispute was settled and that there would be no further claims. And a separate envelope arrived with a typed apology from Emily that did not ask for contact, only said, "I am sorry for what I did and what I allowed." And Jason filed it quietly and never replied because some lines stayed drawn. In January, a snow fell, and Nathan stood at a lobby window at the West End property and watched guests stamp their boots while Alvarez's team checked pumps that now kicked on when they should and heaters that kept breath from showing in the halls. And he thought how many winters he and Jason had crossed with thin coats and hot tea, and how different warm felt when it came from doing the work before the storm. By spring, Jason took the Carter Fund, blue-collar scholars, from a card to a plan to an account, and then to a room, a plain hall near Union Station with folding chairs set in rows, a borrowed podium, and hand-painted signs made by staff kids who had come on a Saturday to help. The mayor's office sent a deputy with a prepared line about good jobs with real ladders. But the room did not need speeches. It needed names. And so they read them. 10 students to start, 5 aiming at electrical work, 3 at HVAC, 2 at IT support, each paired with mentors in the hotels and given paid study hours, bus passes, and boots bought by the company, rather than parents who did not have spare dollars. Jason spoke in simple words that did not reach for the ceiling. We are starting small and strong. And he nodded to Alvarez to say a few lines about the feeling a machine room has when every light reads right. And then he asked Nathan to say something. And Nathan stood at the front with his hands folded the way he always did and said, "Fix the leak before you paint." And the room laughed and clapped, not because it was clever, but because it was true. And he added, "Respect equals love." And the room grew quiet in the good way, because many people there knew what it meant to go home without either and to come back anyway. After the photos and sandwiches, a young mother pressed Nathan's palm between hers and whispered that her son had always looked at wires like they were words, and now he might learn to read them for a living. And Nathan felt his throat tighten and said only, "He'll do fine if he shows up and listens," which was the whole lesson he had spent a lifetime teaching one boy at a kitchen table. Later, when the chairs were stacked and the hall smelled like coffee and cardboard, Jason and Nathan walked out into the late light and crossed to a food cart for 2 plates they could share. And as they ate, Jason took a small worn envelope from his inside pocket, the same one Nathan had seen him slide away the day of the boardroom, and set it on the brick ledge between them. "I kept this for the right day," Jason said, and he handed it over, and Nathan opened it with careful fingers and found two things: the place card from the wedding, sealed in a clear sleeve, and a single page folded once. The page was a deed to a small row house off H Street, modest and well-kept, with a clean roof and a new boiler already signed for, the kind of house that holds heat and quiet. And on the line where the buyer's name was printed, it did not say Jason, it said Nathan Carter. And below it in Jason's neat hand was a note: "Home should belong to the man who built mine." And Nathan stood very still with the paper in his hands while buses hissed and people moved around them. And then he folded the deed back into the envelope and said, "You didn't have to." And Jason said what he had said in the first hard night: "I didn't do it for you, Dad. I did it because of you." And the words felt as clean as a turned valve. In the months that followed, the house became a place where Saturday mornings looked like toast and newspapers, and a chair by a window that held the right light for reading. And after lunch, Nathan would sometimes ride with Jason to walk a property, still choosing basements before lobbies. And sometimes he stayed home and fixed small things that did not need a crew. Hinges that squeaked, a gate that stuck, a neighbor's leaky faucet. Because work that helps is the way his hands know how to pray. Sometimes, when he passed the little frame on the hall table that held two photos, the old one of Jason with a science fair ribbon and the new one of them in the boardroom, he would touch the edge of the glass, the way a man touches a lucky token, not to demand luck, but to remember the road. News about Westbourne calmed into the kind of coverage people barely read because it was not scandal. It was occupancy numbers that rose, guest complaints that fell, a quarterly letter that began, "To our teams first," and ended, "Every person's work has dignity," and a small note from the fire marshal that said, "Thank you for making our jobs easier," which meant more to Nathan than any article. And as for Emily, she changed cities according to a friend of a friend, and sent no more letters. And sometimes that fact sat in Nathan's mind like a pebble and then rolled away. Because life is a road with many pebbles, and you cannot bend down for all of them. On the 1-year mark of the takeover, Jason asked Nathan to come to a staff town hall in a service corridor at the Georgetown property where it had all felt most brittle. And the crews crowded in, shoulders touching, faces up, and Jason spoke a few minutes, then handed the mic to Alvarez, who told a short story about a night when an alarm went off and nothing failed. And then he handed the mic to Nathan and stepped back. Nathan looked at the faces, tired, kind, proud, and said in his plain way, "Thank you for keeping guests safe and beds clean and elevators honest. The city sleeps because you do your job." And he folded his hands and added, "Water tells the truth." And everybody laughed again, because by now the sentence was theirs too. When it ended, a bellman whose father had worked the same hotel 20 years thanked Nathan for coming down the back hall instead of the front. And Nathan said, "Basements first." And the bellman nodded because it made perfect sense. That night, father and son walked home under a clear sky. And when they reached the small row house, Nathan slid the envelope with the deed back into the drawer where he kept screws and spare washers, and he set the wedding place card beside it as a reminder that ink can lie, but work cannot. And he sat in his chair and listened to the quiet house and let his eyes close for a moment. In the soft dark behind his eyelids, he saw a ballroom and a boardroom and a pump room and a plain hall with folding chairs. And the line between them was straight. And he felt, not like a man who had won against someone, but like a man who had stood and held and built until the work itself answered the insult, and the mystery that used to live in his chest like a knot had turned into something simple. A settled place where respect and love shared the same door.